Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a few weeks since you last saw me here on the show, everyone, but I am back for the new year to usher in 2025. And what better way to start this year than by reading a few chapters from Amyntas, son of Persia. Now, if you remember from the last time we had an episode for this series, Amyntas, Artaxerxes, Sea-God, and Themistocles all went to Babylon to finish this war once and for all. And they've now just met some of the last few loyal soldiers of Xerxes, who have pledged their loyalty and their life to the prince. So without further ado, let us conclude Amyntas, son of Persia. Chapter 20. After the introduction, Amyntas, his allies, and friends at the oasis accompanied Megabes for the rest of their journey toward Babylon. As they neared the city, they saw the environment change around them. Instead of sand and rubble, they saw the bodies of men, women, and children, and the stench of smoke rising above them. Nearing a small dune, the company ascended the mound of sand until they saw Babylon before them. Artaxerxes was horrified. "What has he done?" he said to himself. Just a few miles away, the prince saw fire and smoke engulf the once beloved city. Its walls were turned to rubble, and inside the city streets, the ground was stained red with the innocents' blood. Many had fled the city and rested their fates in the hands of the deserts. Only a few hundred remained, too afraid to leave. "How many soldiers occupied the city?" asked the prince. "A division of 1,000 immortals. They occupy the ramparts, patrol the cities, and have checkpoints at both main entrances. There's no way inside," replied Megabes. This was going to be a challenge. Artaxerxes knew that Artabanus would be at the palace atop the hill in the city center. If they engaged the city in the frontal assault, they would die before ever reaching the walls. They needed a plan. "Does the city have any tunnels?" asked Amyntas. Megabes shook his head. Amyntas cursed himself, but then he remembered something about the walls. "What section of the walls is the weakest?" Megabes was puzzled by this question. "Near the southern entrance, but I told you the immortals guard those walls. We can't storm them." Amyntas gave a cunning smile. "We're not going over the walls. We're going through them." All the Persians were puzzled by this statement, but the prince knew what he was referring to. Dismounting their horses, they traveled the rest of their way towards the city. As they reached one section of the wall, they hugged the sides to avoid detection from the defenders atop. Reaching the south end, Amyntas and the others gathered behind the weak section of the defenses. Sea-God and his men acted as lookouts in case any Persians arrived on site. "Okay, Amyntas, what's the plan?" inquired Themistocles. Amyntas turned to Megabes and his men. "I need you and your Persians to stage a mock assault of the walls. Get the defenders' attention and drive them away. Once they're gone, we'll find a way inside. After that, break off and ride away." Megabes looked at the prince for acknowledgement. Amyntas gave it with a nod of his head. Gathering his men, Megabes mounted his horse and rallied his troops. He then ordered his men to attack the city walls. They fired their arrows at the defenders while avoiding enemy fire themselves. Just above Amyntas and the others, they heard the defenders cry out. "Defend the walls!" said one defender. "They are circling! Move to the southern gate!" said another. They heard footsteps above them. Amyntas waited until they could hear no more. "All right, it seems they're gone. What now?" "My prince, how much power do you have left in the staff?" "Just enough for one last burst." "All right, I need you to concentrate all that energy on the bottom end of the staff and burn a hole straight through. Enough for us to squeeze through the walls." Amyntas knew this was the only way in. Artaxerxes nodded his head and asked for space. Grabbing the staff, he placed the butt end on the wall and closed his eyes, softly reciting the prayer again. The power rushing through him did not hurt, but rather give him strength. Feeling the staff vibrating in his hands, he focused on the wall and could see a small black hole form in the center. Soon the gap grew more extensive, and the wall began to change. The stone turned brittle, and there was a slight hissing sound. Soon the hissing sound turned to crackling, and suddenly the black section of the wall disintegrated and faded away, leaving an empty hole. With the power gone, Artaxerxes took several deep breaths. Using the staff's ability took a lot of strength from him. "My prince," said Amyntas. "I'm all right," he replied. Wasting no time, Amyntas and the others entered the city. As for Megabeast, the Persian commander saw what had transpired and ordered his men back into the desert. "May the gods grant you strength, my lord," he said. Now inside the ruined city, Amyntas and his friends cautiously made their way through the different streets, hoping to avoid Persian patrols. As they continued their patrol in the city, Amyntas noticed there was no noise. Nothing at all. An ominous warning. "It's too quiet." "Where are the patrols?" asked Spartan. "Perhaps they're further in?" replied Artaxerxes. Amyntas shook his head. "No, Artaxerxes would not be that arrogant. He's leading us into a trap. But where and when?" Pushing onward, the small party exited the street and stood before the mighty steps leading upwards to the palace. Taking the first step, Amyntas noticed a bird flying above them. Circling overhead, it then perched itself on a building and stared at them. Then, without warning, the bird let out an echoing caw. Suddenly, the party heard footsteps coming from behind. Amyntas' eyes widened and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Run!" The party soon raced up the stairs as hordes of immortals flooded from the city and chased after them, shouting and screaming, swords swinging in the air. Climbing the steps higher and higher, the party dodged arrow fire and missile fire from their pursuers. Nearing the top, Themistocles and Sicarbol stopped and turned to face the Persians. Amyntas was puzzled. "What are you doing?" he shouted. "Giving you time, now go!" shouted the Athenian. Sicarbol shouted in order to his men, "Sacred band! Form wall!" The sacred band of Carthage formed a wall of bronze, ready to face the unending horde. "Go! We'll hold them off here!" said Sicarbol as he unsheathed his sword. Artaxerxes nodded and continued to the door. Amyntas was about to follow when Themistocles grabbed his arm. "Perloter ton bastardo." Make the bastard pay. Amyntas clasped the Athenian's hand. "Tha, I will." Breaking away, he joined his prince as they pushed onward. Nearing the mighty Persian doors, they slammed their bodies against them, pushing with all their might. Amyntas gave one last look at his allies as they entered, and soon the doors closed behind them with a loud thud. Now inside the palace, they calmly walked around, looking for the throne room. As they traversed, the court was covered with gold and vibrant colors of the region and other territories of the empire. Mosaic lines decorated the walls, and the footsteps echoed wherever they went. It was an eerie feeling for everyone. Walking around in the palace that was meant for him. Moving from room to room, they found no one inside except more hordes of wealth and plunder from neighboring kingdoms. Syria, Judea, Egypt, and many more. Soon they reached a large archway with pictures of battles and victories etched all around. Entering, the pair saw an empty throne. This told them they had arrived at the throne room. And once there, it led to an opening that overlooked the city below. "Quite a spectacle, is it not?" said a voice. Amyntas and Artaxerxes reached for their weapons. The voice came almost out of nowhere, as if the shadows had spoken. Then, slowly emerging from the darkness, from where the throne stood, a figure emerged. Finally, after so long, the Prince of Persia and the son of Sparta were face to face with the man who had ruined their lives, sold them into slavery, killed thousands of their men, and destroyed their homes. Artabanus. From appearance, he looked like an older man with silver white hair and a beard. His scarred face had wrinkled through the years, and a patch covered his blind eye, while a hood covered most of his face, save for his mouth. His relatively long-sleeved silky jacket covered him well above the waist, and was tightly tied with a string at the top on the right side. The sleeves on his coat were quite wide, and weren't far apart from his waist. They decorated with a single thread lining and a decorative band. The jacket had a deep, round neckline, which revealed part of the refined armor worn below it, which was worn with a wide leather belt held together by an intricate knot. The leather belt was solely decorative and a status symbol. His pants were simple and broad, reaching down to his soft leather shoes. The boots were made from a pretty uncommon leather, but were otherwise a design found common. He held a spear made entirely out of adamant in his left hand, a mystical stone known for being indestructible. But that was where the assumption ended. Standing before Amyntas and Artaxerxes was a ruthless, ambitious, and patriotic man with dreams of Persian rule worldwide. During his 6-year reign, Artabanus did not hesitate to murder or enslave any opposition. His charisma allowed him to manipulate others with the delusion of a better future. He then stood up from his throne and walked down the steps to meet his guests face to face. "My prince, young Spartan, what a surprise." "It's over, Artabanus. Your rule ends here," shouted Artaxerxes. The older Persian looked at the boy with a smile. "Over? My boy, you have still so much to learn. But I must admit, I am impressed to see you both here. It seems you both survived your captivity." Amyntas tried to control his anger. "Tell me, Artabanus, was it worth it? All this needless death and destruction?" asked Amyntas. "You know the answer to that yourself, Spartan. For peace to exist, others had to die. It's the only way." "No, it is not the only way," shouted Artaxerxes. Artabanus laughed. "After all this time, you are still the same delusional prince from before, guided by morality and emotions, a weakness you and your father shared." The mere mention of his father struck a blow to the young prince. "And tell me, Artabanus, what is your definition of a ruler?" Spat Amyntas. "A ruler is not guided by man's morals, but with the state's rules. You see, my boy, human beings are inherently selfish and short-sighted. Thus, social harmony cannot be assured through the people's recognition of the virtue of their ruler. It can only be achieved through strong state control and absolute obedience to their king. Because of me, my government has made Persia stronger than ever before. I have installed laws that prescribe punishments and rewards for certain behaviors, and have guided the people to increase the empire's power. But most of all, a ruler never reveals his plans to anyone, even his allies, and sets them in places that would better serve him." Amyntas and Artaxerxes began to worry. "What are you saying?" they asked. This was where Artabanus explained his master plan. He knew they would succeed because he planned it that way. He knew once that he sold them into slavery, sold them to Carthage, it was only a matter of time until they returned. During the time he gathered his allies, and with their aid, he was able to consolidate his power in Persia. Once he did, he already made plans to kill them, but knew Amyntas and the others would do it for him. "Alexander is dead, but Sikarbal is alive," said the Persian prince. Artabanus looked surprised by this. "Really? Well, I must visit him once our business here is done." Artabanus then removed his jacket, revealing the armor underneath. Both men were shocked at what they saw. Artabanus was clothed in full battle armor, but resembled more of a mystical god. His helmet resembled one of the heads of Agis-The, the most feared dragon in Persian mythology. It was further decorated with metal horns on the sides and at the top, and teeth-like decorations along the edge of the cheek marks. His arms were protected by dark metal plates, supported by red fabric that only gotten redder with blood over the years. Covering his upper body was a chest plate that was dyed black and resembled a sickly man's rib cage. Around his waist was a tattered belt of dead animal fur and worn leather. His boots combined with metal greaves resembling bird limbs and talons. Altogether, Artabanus was more imposing and dangerous than before. The two young men were lost for it. As you see, it's pointless to resist any further. Surrender. It's your only option. Artaxerxes was speechless and found himself terrified. He was about to speak when Amyntas spoke first. Never. Artabanus stared at the Spartan in disbelief. I really don't understand you. After all I've told you, with everything that I've achieved, how many more must die for the throne? Just one, said Amyntas, unsheathing his sword. Chapter 21. The atmosphere in the room grew tense as both men stared at each other. Artaxerxes moved away from the confrontation, giving them room. At first, Artabanus believed that Amyntas would fight for the prince as a champion. He chuckled at the thought. What's wrong, your highness? Are you afraid to fight your own battles? His words insulted Artaxerxes' honor, who returned to challenge the man himself, only to be stopped by Amyntas. Wait, he said. Amyntas, let me pass. I need to face him. You will. Trust me, he whispered to him. Speaking softly into his ear, Artaxerxes stepped away and allowed Amyntas to fight Artabanus. Amyntas glared at his hated foe. Both men circled each other like two wolves fighting over a kill. Both men were at the peak of their warrior skills. Amyntas, the Spartan with his memories and skill from the past, against Artabanus, leader of the Persian immortals and king of Persia. The beginning would be a test of will to see who would make the first move. Amyntas had his shield in front and his sword behind, while Artabanus arrogantly placed the weapon over his shoulder. The air was still, and the fates awaited. Soon both men rushed each other and clashed, spear against sword. Artabanus smiled evilly at the Spartan. Despite his old age, he was still a dangerously skilled soldier. The two broke from their clash and engaged once more. The fight was tremendous. Both quickly countered each other and displayed their fighting skills. When Artabanus thrust his spear at Amyntas, the Spartan blocked it with his shield and attacked with his sword, aimed at the Persian's legs. He cut him just above the knee with the tip of his blade. Artabanus looked at the cut and then back at Amyntas. The Persian ruler raised his spear above him with blinding speed and slammed the weapon towards Amyntas. The Spartan lifted his sword to block the strike, and while he managed to stop most weapon, the spear scratched against his helmet and cut his right eye, leaving him with a bloody wound. Now we're even, said Artabanus. This time Amyntas took the initiative and charged at the Persian. He attacked with his sword and shield. Artabanus managed to block the attacks, but one got through his defense. As the Persian attacked with his spear, Amyntas blocked with his sword and, using his shield arm, uppercutted Artabanus with a shield strike to the jaw. The blow knocked the helmet off the old man, forcing the Persian to the ground. Landing on the tile floor, Artabanus landed on his back. Dazed and confused, he was stopped by a sword directed at his throat. He then looked up and saw Amyntas standing over him. Artabanus chuckled. What's the matter, boy? Too noble to take a life? It's not mine to take, said the Spartan. Sheathing his blade, he stepped aside and allowed Artaxerxes to deliver the coup de grace. Artabanus, confused what was going on, reached for his spear and helped him get to his feet. He was puzzled and confused. Why did the Spartan not kill him? It didn't matter. He would die either way. Turning to the prince, he spoke softly. Why so eager to end your story? Not for me, but for my father, said Artaxerxes. Artabanus snickered. Well, what a doting son you are. The prince could hide his anger no longer. Let's end this. You and me, he said. He grabbed the staff and readied himself for battle. Artabanus cracked his neck, prepared for another fight. The young prince knew he needed to think outside the box about whether he would win this duel. Artabanus had taught him everything, so he had to be unpredictable. Artabanus slowly approached him and began to strike at the prince with his spear as he got into a defensive stance. Artaxerxes deflected the strike, but received a few cuts across the chest and his arms. The prince returned with a few attacks of his own. As expected, the former immortal blocked and dodged all of the strikes. When his spear clashed with the prince's staff, the prince kicked Artabanus in the groin, stunning him temporarily. As the prince went to strike again, the usurper stabbed the prince in the shoulder. The spear quickly and rather easily pierced the scale armor and forced the prince to rely solely on one arm. The prince whelped in pain as he felt the metal tip tear through his flesh. Artaxerxes looked at Amyntas for support, but he knew he had to be the one to end this. Even with one arm, Artaxerxes would not go down without a fight. Now Artabanus was getting angry. His attacks soon became more vicious and aggressive. He struck high and low all over the place. The prince, covered in blood and sweat, defended him as best he could. Suddenly Artabanus slashed the prince across the chest, tearing through the scale armor. Artaxerxes gasped. Severely wounded, the prince managed to get one last strike as he swung the staff, striking Artabanus directly in the head. The blow landed directly across his jaw and knocked out a few teeth. However, the staff head broke open, dropping the stone to the ground. As Artabanus fell to his knees, he clutched his broken jaw. He moaned in pain. He knew his jaw was broken in several places. He felt the broken pieces in both his mouth. The more he moved it, wounded and in pain, Artabanus blinked a few more times, trying to recover from a blow like that. As for the prince, he clutched his stomach as he tried to stop the bleeding. Both men were near death's doors, yet one had to be the victor. Sauntering towards the prince, he stopped for a moment. It didn't have to be like this. It could have gone the other way, said Artabanus. It really could have, couldn't it? Replied Artaxerxes. No, but why speak ill of the dead? Artabanus kicked the young man down and stood over him. Before the prince could react, a spear was raised over his heart. Artaxerxes stared blankly at the ceiling, his hand resting on the stone. Any last words, your highness? Asked Artabanus. Unbeknownst to the immortal, the sun's presence had been increasing in the room, and soon the sun's warmth was on the prince's hand, which was on the stone. Closing his eyes, he whispered the prayer one final time. Artabanus saw this and, mistaking for deliverance, prepared to deliver the final blow. In a flash, the prince grabbed the spear's tip with his remaining hand and thrust the stone directly into the man's face. Soon Artaxerxes' arms began to glow brighter than before, his eyes shining with power and authority. The sight terrified Artabanus. Fear the light, said the prince. Suddenly, a burst of blue flame from the stone engulfed the old man's face. The Persian king dropped the spear and uttered an agonizing scream as he tried to extinguish the fire. He ran around the room until the pain became so great he fell to his knees. As for Artaxerxes, he slowly lifted himself off the floor. He breathed and struggled to get to his feet. He was held back up thanks to Amyntas, who assisted him as he made their way to the fallen king. As they stared at him, they saw the damage the flames had done to him. His hair had burned off, and his face was beyond recognition. It was a surprise, or miracle, that he was still alive. The sheer pain should have killed him. However, both were glad he did not die. With his one good eye, he glared menacingly at the young man. As he spoke, his voice was gravelly and dry. I should have killed you both that day on the beach, he said, struggling to speak. Yeah, you should have, said Amyntas. But you didn't, finished Artaxerxes. With one last gasp of air, Artabanus succumbed to his injuries and died with a haunting expression. Back with Themistocles and Sicarbal, both men were nearing their end. Sicarbal and the sacred band held off several Persian advances, but suffered heavy losses. He was down to only 5 remaining men, and Themistocles was beginning to feel the fear of his mortality and age. As for the Persians, they too suffered losses. Most of the city defenders died on the steps leading to the palace, while the remaining were forced to back down. Quite an exercise, said Themistocles tiredly. Sicarbal looked at the Athenian comically. An exercise? For you Greeks, possibly. For us Carthaginians, this is a warm-up. He replied. They knew the end was coming, and they saw the Persians regrouped for another counterattack. The soldiers and the small band stood ready to fight to the last. With the sound of a horn, the Persians launched themselves at the small band of defenders. However, the advancing Persians stopped just as they were about to overtake them. Themistocles and Sicarbal looked on in confusion. Why had they stopped? Suddenly they heard footsteps behind them. Turning around, they saw 2 images emerging from the shadows. Amyntas and Artaxerxes, bloodied, bruised, and worn for wear. Is it over? Asked Sicarbal. Amyntas looked at his friends. Yes. Yes, it is. Chapter 22. A few days after the death of Artabanus, Artaxerxes ordered Megabees to spread word throughout the empire that the son of Xerxes had returned. The former Babylonian residents returned home and rebuilt their lives. Soon word reached beyond the empire's borders and reached Sparta. Upon hearing the news, everyone immediately sailed to Babylon for celebration. When they arrived, the people of Babylon awarded them a hero's welcome. For many days and nights, Amyntas and his allies celebrated many things. Artaxerxes' ascension to the throne, Amyntas and Anahita's marriage, the defeat of Artabanus, and most of all, the glory of those who had died in this battle for freedom. Later that day, or rather, the next day, keeping his word, Artaxerxes gave Sicarbal all the treasure Artabanus had acquired through the years of